music only lasts for so long, so might as well dance while you still can.
My grandpa, Norm, died when I was 4. I was so young, I only vaguely remember him. But he's obviously still my grandpa, and I still love him. Growing up, I always saw ghosts, and the majority of the time, shadow people. I grew pretty used to it, but sometimes it would still freak me out. Well, one day, when I was probably 9 or 10, I was staying at my grandma's for the weekend. I did this frequently. My grandma borderline raised me. I didn't have a bedtime on weekends, especially there. And my grandma had internet and a computer that I didn't have at home. So I would usually be up till 2 or 3 a.m. on YouTube and whatever 9-year-old me felt like doing. As I've always had insomnia and sleeping issues, and wanted to make the most out of having the internet. So it was probably around 2ish in the morning. I was seeing shadow people that night out of the corner of my eye, messing with me, and it happened to be one of those nights where it freaked me out. And I was very anxious and paranoid. I suddenly had the urge that I needed to look to my left, so I did. In the doorway of my grandma's bedroom, I saw my grandpa, Norm. I may have been young when he died, but I do have memories with him and remembered what he looked like, so I knew who he was right away. He just smiled at me and then disappeared. The second I looked over and saw him though, all of my fear vanished and I was instantly calm. The entire energy of the room shifted and I was fine the rest of the night. Naturally, I told my grandma what happened the next morning, and she nearly cried, and still talks about it to this day. I'm going on 20 now. Unrelated to that story, but I think it's worth mentioning. I was talking to my grandma recently, and she told me that one night, somewhere within the span of the past month, she was crying because she missed him, and has been dreaming and thinking of him a lot lately. During this, she said to the empty room, "Norm, if you're up there and watching over me, send me some sort of sign. Rain dimes down so I know." Since that night, she's been finding dimes everywhere she goes. Way more than what would be considered usual. I am in no way religious, but I would say I'm pretty spiritual, and I don't believe in coincidences personally. And that story has stuck with me since she told me. Sorry this ended up much longer than expected. I just thought I'd share one of my nice ghost stories. I had 2 dogs, one being a 100-pound Chow Chow retriever mix. He didn't like to jump. He had a spot on the couch he could crawl up on, but when it came to beds and cars, he always needed a lift up. At night, he would wander around, and when he was finally ready for bed, he would finally walk into my bedroom and plop down on the side with a thump that would shake the bed. In 2012, he developed inoperable cancer, and from then on, he went pretty fast. The day came where it was time to say goodbye. I took him to the vet and put him down and drove home without him. I was very distraught, losing my happy boy. Now, my bedroom door creaks pretty loudly when it opens. I sleep with my door open a crack so my other dog and my cats can come and go through the night. Maybe a week of mourning passes, and I'm up one night. I'm just laying there with my eyes closed, trying to fall asleep, when I hear my door creak slightly. I thought it could have been my other dog and didn't think much of it. I open my eyes and look for her, and find she's not there. Then, the door creaks again. I sit up and watch it. The door opens a little at a time, maybe a couple of inches over a couple of minutes, until it is wide open. I just sit there and stare at it, unable to move, because I couldn't explain what was happening. After it had been open for about 30 seconds, I feel a large thump by the side of my bed that shakes it. The first night I was terrified. I couldn't fall back asleep. The next night it happened again. As soon as it was light out, I got out of bed and began trying to manipulate the door that opened on its own. My window was closed at night, but I opened it. I tried pointing fans at the door. I pushed the door open myself. I opened other windows when it was windy to create a cross draft. I turned all the air in the house on. Nothing I could do could cause my door to move at all. After about a week of this, I'm not scared anymore. I can't explain it, but it even started to be a little comforting. Feeling the thump of my beloved dog laying down next to me, I'll take it. After that week, it just stopped. I laid up at night and waited for it, but it never happened again. 8 years have passed, and my door has never, not once, opened on its own again. When my other dog passed, I waited for it to happen, but it never did. I was, however, up at night again, and I heard her growl like she did when she needed to be let out. Only the once, and then nothing paranormal ever happened again.
The doorbell rang after 1:30 a.m. The movie The Vikings with Tony Curtis and Kirk Douglas was on downstairs, music blaring while my mum was busying herself around. She was a night owl, but this night she was up until my dad got home. They had fought earlier, and he went out for the night with business associates. She was supposed to accompany them but refused, so he went alone. I had just returned from looking for him. He had called just before 1 a.m. He thought I was my mum. He asked me to pick him up. I could tell he had been drinking. "Stay where you are, Dad. I'm on my way." At 1:06 a.m., just as I'm walking out the door, he calls again.
"I'll be walking and waving my arms,"
he slurred on repeat. "No, Dad. Stay where you are. I'm leaving now." When I got there, I could not find him. Every time I tried, I was pushed back by the blast of late December air. But there was a car, turned the wrong way on the dark, rural, 2-lane road, with a rumpled up hood, and a windshield busted out. Wow, I thought. They must have hit a deer. No cops yet. No ambulance. I got there before they did. I opened our front door shortly after I got home to a police officer and a minister. I'll never forget, till the day I die, the minister. His dark skin, set off by his large, compassionate dark eyes that stared right into me. Afraid for me, reaching out to me, knowing he was about to change my life. The officer asked me if my mum was home. "Yes," I answered. "If this is about my dad, I was just looking for him," I said with a casual, almost friendly tone to hide my apprehension.
"We need to speak to your mother,"
was the officer's curt response. His "just the facts, ma'am" demeanor was more than matched by the compassion the minister gave me by his full-on profound stare. While I was hanging up my coat, I heard the minister tell my mum,
"There's been an accident, and your husband was killed."
He died at 1:11 a.m. Dad and Mum were 40. I was 19. Home from school. It was just after Christmas. My siblings were younger and all still in school. The rest of the night was a whir of hospital, identify the body visits, the priest, phone calls, drives to the place he died and back. and back again, and sitting around in disbelief. What do we do now? He was the most powerful man in the world. He was gone. We were adrift. It was a long time before I could sleep again. I think it was not until later that next night. People were calling. Small town, so it was the headline on the front page that morning. Pedestrian killed on X road. I know because my boyfriend at the time and I ran out and bought the paper at dawn. Papers. I still have mine. People kept coming over bringing food, crying, needing comfort. The janitor from my former high school was the first person to call with condolences. Dad was very loved. We were numb. Mum was melting. I had to step up. I finally had enough and went to bed. Everyone else remained talking downstairs. Mum was still up. So were siblings, 2 to 4. I decided to go lie down in Mum and Dad's bed, on his side of the bed, and buried my face in his pillow. It smelled like him. Lying flat on my stomach, I silently cried myself to sleep in the darkness. He'd been dead now about 24 hours. How was that possible? At some point, I was awakened by someone sitting on the bed, stroking my hair. It was a real, genuine, sensory touch. Comforting, loving. I felt it from a dead, exhausted sleep state. No mistaking it. So real that when it woke me up, I reached up expecting to touch my mum's hand. Empty space. "Mum?" I said as I rolled over. Silence. "Mum? Is that you?" Electric stillness. I reached out from the bed and waved my arm back and forth in the darkness. Nothing. No one. I sat up. "Mum!" Dead silence. Dead darkness. I got up, ran out of the room and sprang to the top of the stairs. "Mum!" "Yes?" she replied. "Were you just up here in your room, trying to wake me up?" Pin drop. "No, honey," she said softly. "I just felt you rubbing my hair," I implored, almost begging. Pause. "It wasn't me, sweetheart," she said flatly. But it had been so real. It woke me up. I ran all the way down the stairs and just looked at her. We just stared. Tears started to well up in her eyes, then in mine too. We didn't say another word. We didn't have to. I turned away, staring at the floor, and just whispered to myself, "I love you too, Dad." This story happened a long, long time ago. When I was 4 years old and my little brother was 2. It was around this time of year, Thanksgiving to be precise. My mother was calling my younger brother to eat from the living room, but he didn't come right away. When he came in, my grandma jokingly asked what took him so long. What he said caused the people at the table to go quiet. "Joe gives kisses." Some info. My great-grandfather was named Joseph, and he went by Joe. He had been dead for 5 years. For ages, people had always chalked it up to being me, as my name was Joseph as well. But my brother always called me by my full name. My brother has mental issues, and that's why nobody batted an eye when he would look up at the living room mantel and laugh. I think it was Grandpa Joe he was talking to. My mum's house is huge, relatively secluded, and century-old farmhouse in Wisconsin. To add to the already spooky vibes,
The former residents are buried down the road from the house in a tiny graveyard. I've had more than a few experiences on the property, and my mum has too. This is one of the more wholesome ones though. Specifically, in the kitchen dining room of my mum's house, we'd occasionally spot a black shape moving in the corner of our eye. That'd be gone when we looked at it. I don't know how else to describe it, except that even though I've never seen it head on, it has always just suggested the thought of cat to me when I saw it. It was a very neutral but skittish presence. It would also seem to appear mostly as we were mid-conversation or mid-meal. Maybe it wanted a treat or something. As a cat person, I've always felt fond of it. We had both a cat and a dog, but based on size and colour, it couldn't have been either of them. No pest problems at that time either. I've seen it, my mum's seen it, and I think another family member or two has seen it too. The reason I don't remember is because, like most of the other paranormal activity in the house, it stopped happening within 6 months of us moving in. I hope at this point, the ghost cat is somewhere with its former owners, finally getting the snacks and cuddles it deserves. This experience happened in May of 1979 when I was 15 years old. My maternal grandmother had passed, maybe a week or two before this event. I always loved going to her house as a child and spending the night. She was a wonderful grandma. She had moved to California after her last husband died in 1976, so I didn't get to see her for the last 3 years of her life. I was a freshman in high school, and in English class we were reading Romeo and Juliet. I had stayed up late that night while my parents slept to watch Romeo and Juliet on our local PBS station. All 3 of my older brothers had already moved out of the house, so I was the only one awake at that time. I was laying on the floor of the living room with my pillow and blanket, with only the television on. All the lights in the house were off. I'd never really had any odd things happen to me in our home, and was quite comfortable being up alone with no lights. A little explanation on how our house was laid out. The living room was in the front of the house, with the dining room and kitchen directly behind the living room. The area between the living room and the dining room is completely open, while the kitchen area is blocked from the living room by the wall for the stairs going to the basement. You could walk from the living room to the dining room, to the kitchen, to the front hallway, which brings you back to the living room. Between the kitchen and the front hallway is the basement stairs, and if you go the other direction, it's a hallway to the 3 bedrooms and bathroom. On with the story. I was on the floor with pillow and blanket watching the TV when I heard the sound of flip-flop shoes come from the kitchen into the dining room and right up behind my dad's reclining chair. That was maybe 3 feet behind me. Now, my grandma always wore flip-flops in the summer. It was a sound I associated with her. I've always loved the paranormal and accepted it as part of life. My mum had told me things that happened to her as a child and adult since I was little. But when I heard the flip-flops, I was basically frozen in fear. I called out in a small voice, "Mom?" Even though I knew it was not her. No answer. I knew she was sleeping and never wore those type of shoes, or even owned a pair of them. I can't even remember if I was brave enough to look behind the chair. I grabbed up my pillow and blanket, turned off the TV, and ran like a frightened rabbit. I'm not sure how I navigated the first corner. It was completely dark in the house, but when I made the second turn to go into the hallway to the safety of my room, I miscalculated the turn and ran directly into the wall. Luckily, I had my blanket draped over my arm, otherwise I might have broken it. When I hit the wall, all my mind could think was that I ran into a person, most likely the ghost of my grandma. I was struck with crazy terror before I figured out it was just the wall. and that I had made the turn too soon. In the safety of my room, lights on, door locked, and under my blanket, I slowly calmed myself down. I don't remember for sure, but I think I slept with the lights on that night. I told my mum the next morning. She asked me why I was so scared, and made me realize that my grandma would never hurt me, and that maybe she just wanted to see me one last time and or say goodbye. That was so true. She wouldn't hurt me. And as I've thought about it over the years, it's really very sweet that she came to me that night. There's no way that anyone will ever convince me that this didn't happen. I was 100% awake at the time, and it was most certainly my grandma. Years later, when my first child, my daughter, was 2, she came to me again, and that time I really believe she saved my life. I'll save that story for another time. I have been dating my boyfriend for 3 years. In September of 2020, his stepfather passed away unexpectedly due to a stroke. I was really close with him. We got on really well, and honestly, of course the death wasn't as hard for me compared to my boyfriend and his family, but it really hurt. His stepfather accepted and liked me immediately upon meeting me. We got along so well. He loves to cook, and so did I. So one day I made him and the family steak for dinner. He was super famous for his steaks. And while I was cooking, he started crying because he was so happy and proud of me. It was really hard because I always saw him as a dad too, and I was excited for him to be a part of our wedding and see our children, etc., etc. Well, when he died, my boyfriend kept saying that he would visit him in his dreams. I was happy for him, but a little sad because he hadn't come to visit me, and I began to wonder if I was even worthy of being visited. I will say I believe I have some sort of abilities, because in my boyfriend's mum's house, I often sense or feel his stepfather, especially when everyone talks about him. I've always been able to see and feel things whenever I was a kid, and so it was no surprise to me. Sometimes whenever we talk about him, he will show up and smile happily or pat someone on the shoulder. And I always relay the message to my boyfriend, and he finds it comforting. Well, today is my birthday, and I had a dream that my boyfriend's family threw me a birthday dinner and his stepfather was there. He was a lot skinnier and looked polished. In the dream, I said to him, "Hey, did they bring you back?" He just smiled and shrugged and mumbled something. I then said, "They made you look really good," and he laughed. I gave him a hug and started crying, and he just rubbed my back, and he said something comforting. I said something about how I missed him. I then asked, "Are you in the house a lot? You know, when I see you and stuff." Because sometimes I don't believe I actually have abilities and think it's all in my head. But he smiled at me and said, "Yes, thank you." I woke up immediately after that because my mum came in to tell me happy birthday. Just on Saturday, my boyfriend had thrown me a surprise birthday party with my family, and I cried later that night because his stepfather wasn't there and his mum didn't come either. Last night, I literally had a dream with him and everyone else too. I'm a little sad, but so happy he visited me. So this happened to me back in 2017, when I was just about to turn 18. For a bit of context that will be important, I seem to have the same problem that a lot of men have, where I can't find something sometimes, even when it is right in front of my face. This deeply annoyed my mum, and any time that I would ask her to help me find something, and it would be in plain sight, she would pick it up and throw it at me. Not hard, just playfully, and roll her eyes really hard. Back to the day in question. My mum had just been pulled off life support after being pronounced legally brain dead. The choice was up to me, and I knew she wouldn't want a life like that. So on the evening of the day, I had told the doctors to pull the plug. My uncle, who had come from another state to help me get affairs in order, had made scalloped potatoes for dinner. After we'd finished eating, I went to the kitchen to put away the leftovers. I put the casserole dish they were made in on the stove and walked to the pantry to grab the cling wrap. I looked for a minute or two and could not find it. In my emotionally raw state, I began to lose my temper and loudly exclaimed, "Where the fuck is it?" After a moment or two, I saw a swift blur of movement above my head as the cling wrap flew off the second to top shelf and hit me right in the face, but not very hard. It took me a moment to process what had happened. I stood there in complete shock, and then I kinda broke down in the middle of the kitchen. I tried to think of anything it could have been, trying to convince myself it couldn't have been her. But I have come up empty. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.